Hello, class. Okay, starting a new unit, we have a new period called the Enlightenment. 1700s was the height of it. It started in the 1600s, and it really also nicknamed the Age of Reason. You may have heard of this before. A couple things, you can kind of look at the screen here and follow along with the bullet points. People believed they could discover truth by reason alone, by thinking. So if we just are reasonable, put emotion aside, we can discover truth. Natural world, human nature, social institutions governed by universal laws. Those laws to be discovered. And if you use your head in reason, you can discover them. One of the big beliefs was the idea that men are created equal, and they are endowed with certain natural rights. That might sound rather familiar to you. It should. And also that governments exist not because the king gets the right from God to rule, but that they should live by the consent of the governed. So we're going to look at the Enlightenment. You have a yellow document. Grab that. And on the back side of this chart, flip it over. We're going to be looking at two philosophers from this time period called the Enlightenment, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. And I want you to flip over, and I want you to make a chart that looks like this. Write on one side, make a T-chart, write scientists on one side. Go ahead and write Enlightenment thinkers on the other. Pause if you need to. Write that down. Okay, so you have scientists written down, Enlightenment thinkers. If you don't, go ahead and pause and make sure you get it done. And let me just compare science with Enlightenment thinkers. They both use reason. They both observe things. And they both apply reason to their different endeavors. Scientists, though, apply reason. Write this down. They observe and think about the natural world, Earth, astronomy. Go ahead and jot that down. Scientists observe and think about the natural world. Again, we're working on the back side of our notes sheet. Enlightenment thinkers, the people we're going to be talking about here, these age of reason thinkers, they do something a little different. They observe and think not about the natural world, not about Earth, not about rocks, not about astronomy. They actually think about the human world. Jot that down. Observe and think about the human world. What's the human world? Government, laws, human behavior. That's what they look at. If you need to pause to get this down, go ahead and do that now because I'm moving on to the next slide. Okay, so a couple things to remember is that Enlightenment thinkers, and you see pictures of them here, they apply reason to the human world, government, laws, and human behavior. So these thinkers, they're going to have a huge influence on the United States in the 1700s. The United States is incredibly influenced by these guys. Our country has truly been developed in our founding and our government and all the different aspects of our government. Many of them came directly from this time period, the Enlightenment or Age of Reason. Okay, we're going to first look at Thomas Hobbes. As we go through, you fill out your chart, you'll see like where he's from, what he wrote, and you got observations. You're going to fill in the blanks as we go. We'll do Hobbes and Locke today. First, we'll start at the top of the chart, and you'll see you need to fill in where it's in red. If it's in red, you write it. The Age of Reason will influence leaders of the American Revolution. So take a second and jot those in. The Age of Reason will influence the leaders of the American Revolution. Awesome. First off, we're going to look at Hobbes. You're going to be using your chart. We're going to be looking at from, his book, his observation, his hypothesis. All right, first off, where's he from? England. Put that on the chart. He's from England. Thomas Hobbes actually lived during the English Civil War, which is going to seriously impact what he observed. Remember, he's like a scientist, except he applies it to humans. He's going to observe human beings and how they behave in the English Civil War, and it's not good. It is a civil war, by the way. He's going to write a book called Leviathan. Write that in the chart where it has a place for the book. He writes a book called Leviathan. If you Google the word Leviathan, you're going to come up with a massive sea monster, some scary sort of thing. And that's exactly what a Leviathan is. It is this massive sea monster that's like very scary looking. The question with Hobbes is, why does he write a book after living through the English Civil War? Why does he write a book about, and the title is about a massive sea monster? What is that all about? Well, you'll see that it's metaphorical. The Leviathan is something or someone else. Okay, first off, he observes in the English Civil War that, and here's a very, very famous quote by him, that humans live in a primitive, quote, state of nature. Go ahead and fill it in, a state of nature. And they consent to government for protection. Okay, step back and listen to this. First off, primitive. When you think primitive, you think like not very advanced, almost like caveman-like. And here's what Hobbes thought. When he lived through the American Civil War, the English Civil War, he noticed that like people just started acting crazy. I mean, they burned villages, they killed people, they executed the king. And it was just awful. He felt like humans were like devolving. They're becoming more primitive. He called this primitive state of war a state of nature. And really that state of nature is war. It's war all the time. It's just horrible. It's like human beings without government, basically. You and I would call it anarchy. And what he believed is that in this state of anarchy, it's so awful, it's so bad, humans become so desperate in anarchy or his state of nature that they will consent or give permission to a group of people to form a government, and they'll form a government to protect themselves from each other. That's basically the reason government exists. Hobbes said the reason government has to exist is because you and I, without government, are so horrible. We will murder, we will steal, we will attack, we will rape. I mean, we will hurt each other if it's not for law and government. And so you and I consent to government to protect ourselves from each other. That's basically what it says. Matter of fact, there's a very famous quote from the book Leviathan. And here it is. There's a little picture of Hobbes there. During the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe. By the way, common power means government. Keep them in awe means scared, like you're scared to violate the law because you'll get arrested. They are in what conditions called war. And such a war as if every man against every man. So basically, if we don't have government, we're all at war with each other. That's anarchy. If you watch Walking Dead, essentially The Walking Dead and shows like that are apocalyptic, they are all where every man's against every man, every woman's against every woman. We're all killing each other, and it's a horrible way to live, minus the zombies, of course. So that's what Thomas Hobbes was talking about, is that it was just horrible, okay? And as a matter of fact, he puts it this way, that life without government is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Solitary, you're going to be alone. You can't trust anyone. Poor, if you own something, someone will steal it. Nasty, there's going to be dead bodies. There's going to be things decaying. No one's going to take care of anything. Trash is everywhere. Brutish, you're going to get beat up. That's what being a brute means. And short, guess what? You're going to freaking die. That's how bad life is. So Hobbes lived in the English Civil War, and he did not like what he saw about humans. It was awful. And so that's his observation. His solution is his hypothesis. And this is where we can disagree with him, but his hypothesis was simply, we need absolutism. Like, you need some power. The government needs to be so powerful that it literally scares you and I into behaving. That's what Leviathan is. The Leviathan is a king. In fact, check this out. This is an inside cover of a Leviathan. Pretty cool picture here. It's a massive monster. Notice that it has bodies in it. It's kind of a really cool artwork. And this is something that, like, this is the Leviathan. This is Leviathan, like, controls us. It consumes us. We're scared of it. And in some ways, we're part of it. This is the jacket cover of Leviathan, the book written by Hobbes. And you can see on the left-hand side, the king coming over the mountainside. And he's huge, he's massive, and he's made up of bodies. And everyone consents to give him power. And if you saw some massive king like that come over the countryside, you would be scared and you would behave because you'd be worried about the power he has. So to Hobbes, the Leviathan is the king. It's the person that keeps us in check. It's the government that scares us into behaving, and that without law, without order, you and I would do horrible things. If there wasn't a teacher in the room every day, someone would steal from you. If there wasn't a principle, people would beat each other up all the time. And so, yeah, that's kind of the way Leviathan looked at it. He felt like we just couldn't trust human beings, and so you needed a government that controlled us all. So that's Hobbes, Leviathan, absolute government needed. Otherwise, we live in a primitive state of nature that is basically anarchy. And he kind of lived through an anarchy of sorts in the English Civil War. By the way, just for fun, this is from Halo 3. A student saw this, and one of the tanks was called Leviathan. See it there on the picture? Just kind of funny. All right, John Locke. Where's he from? Book, Observation, and Hypothesis. Locke is another Enlightenment thinker. He is also from England. Go ahead and jot it down. He's going to write a book called The Two Treatises on Government. He writes a book called The Two Treatises on Government. A treatise, by the way, is just a big essay. So he writes a 2 treatises on government, and Locke is totally different. His observation is completely different. He observes people, and he says, yes, people consent to a government, but not to like scare each other, so that way we never do anything bad, like Hobbes. He says that we consent to a government to protect natural rights of life, liberty, and property. He writes this right after the Glorious Revolution. And remember, the Glorious Revolution is glorious because, and yes, you're right, because it was bloodless. And James left, and William and Mary came to power, and they signed a Bill of Rights. He saw this happen, and he goes, oh, wait a second. So government is formed. We had to get rid of James. We had to get William and Mary in order to protect our natural rights. That's why government's formed. Protect our natural rights. And among them, he said, our life, liberty, and property. And yes, this is over almost 100 years prior to Thomas Jefferson writing, the government exists to protect our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And yes, Thomas Jefferson basically plagiarized from the 2 treatises on government. So Locke, observes the Glorious Revolution in that we protect liberty and we protect freedom. And Hobbes, though, he saw the English Civil War and he saw everybody killing each other and it was awful, so he says we need absolutism. Like, Hobbes was probably one of the only people that was happy when Cromwell was dictator. Like, seriously, he was pretty happy. Locke, though, he sees William and Mary come in, Bill of Rights, we protect rights, and he's like, oh, no, government is great and people consent to it to protect our natural rights of life, liberty, and property. His hypothesis is that the people are sovereign. They have power. And another way to think of sovereign is that we consent. That's like consent of the governed. You and I are sovereign. We have power. We consent to our government. We vote. And so his hypothesis is that people should have power by voting, and that makes them sovereign. And the king is not sovereign. He is not sovereign. He only rules to protect our rights. And of course, our government exists only to protect rights. And from each other, but also from the government as well, because the government can violate our rights. So, to review, we have 2 major thinkers here. Hobbes, seeing people act horribly, like in an anarchic state, so therefore we need an absolute government as his solution. We see Locke in a different situation, a Glorious Revolution, and people's rights are protected, so therefore he says, well, yeah, government protects our rights, and that's why it exists, and the people therefore have power over our government to make sure it protects rights. So that is our 2 Enlightenment people. You need to practice on the Enlightenment. You need to do the practice quiz on Enlightenment. Make sure you get both of those done. The quiz does count for a grade. Thank you very much.